Rabbi Ezra Goldstein's near-death experience, a journey beyond the veil. For 51 years, my life was a testament to unwavering devotion. As a rabbi in Brooklyn, my days were filled with the study of Torah, the teaching of Jewish law, and the guidance of my congregation. Every moment was spent in the pursuit of wisdom, ensuring that my community remained steadfast in our ancient traditions. But in a single winter night, everything I believed, everything I stood for, was shattered. I died that night. 14 minutes and 16 seconds, long enough for my heart to stop, for my breath to cease, for my body to grow cold. In that brief window between life and eternity, I saw things no man should ever see, heard voices that will never leave me, and encountered a truth that would turn my entire world upside down. But before I tell you what I saw, you must first understand who I was. Born into a family of esteemed rabbis, my path was set before I could even speak. My father, a revered scholar who escaped the fires of Europe, carried the weight of generations on his shoulders. My mother, a woman of deep faith, instilled in me a love for the Torah that became the foundation of my existence. By the age of 13, I could recite entire sections of scripture from memory, earning the nickname the Living Scroll. My bar mitzvah speech was attended by scholars from across New York, and by 18, I was already being molded into a leader. I studied with some of the most brilliant minds in yeshiva, engaging in relentless debates that carried into the early hours of the morning. Jewish law was my life. Every ruling, every interpretation, every precedent was a puzzle piece in a grand design that I dedicated my entire being to understanding. But there was always something, something I dared not speak of, that gnawed at the edges of my certainty. I first felt it when I encountered Isaiah 53, a chapter that did not align with our traditional explanations. The suffering servant described there seemed too clear, too deliberate in its implications. But rather than allow the discomfort to take root, I buried it beneath layers of scholarly interpretation. For decades, I preached with confidence, guiding my congregation with absolute certainty. I married Rebecca, the daughter of another esteemed rabbi, and together we built a family steeped in tradition. My eldest son, David, followed in my footsteps, studying to become a rabbi himself. Sarah, my daughter, pursued Jewish academia. And my youngest, Benjamin, carried the same fervor for the Torah that once burned within me. From the outside, my life was perfect. A legacy continued, a lineage preserved. But all of that was about to change. It was January 12th, a cold winter night like any other. Dinner had been peaceful, the house quiet. My wife had gone to bed, my youngest was staying at a friend's, and I was left alone in the kitchen, tinkering with a faulty toaster. A simple task, something mundane, something that should have meant nothing. I unplugged it, let it dry, then tested it. But as I reached inside to wipe away the last drops of water, an electrical surge shot through my body. The force of it sent me crashing backward, my head striking the granite counter. And then, nothing. A void. Not darkness, not emptiness, but the complete absence of all things. No light, no sound, no sense of self. Just nothingness. But then, slowly, something emerged. First the weight. A crushing, unbearable weight that pressed against my very soul. Then the voices, thousands of voices. Not screaming, not shrieking in agony, but weeping. Weeping in regret, weeping in sorrow, weeping as if they had come to understand something far too late. Shapes formed around me, faces. Familiar faces. Rabbis I had studied under. Scholars I had respected. Men who had spent their lives in service to the Torah. And yet, they were here. In this place of torment. Ezra, a voice called, a voice I had not heard in years. Rabbi Menachem Kavod, my most revered teacher, stood before me. But his face, once filled with wisdom and kindness, was now twisted with unbearable sorrow. "We were wrong," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 regrets. "We studied the prophecies. We knew the signs. But in our pride, we refused to see." Another voice joined him. Rabbi Shlomo Emmet, a scholar whose arguments against the messianic prophecies had shaped much of my own beliefs. But now, his voice trembled. "We made the law our idol, Ezra. We waited for what had already come. We rejected what had been given to us." Their words pierced through me like a blade. Memories of my own debates flooded my mind. The arguments I had constructed, the students I had dissuaded, the countless times I had dismissed the very thoughts that now burned with undeniable truth. But before I could speak, light appeared. A distant glow at first, but growing, expanding, until it filled every corner of the realm. The weight of sorrow lifted, the cries faded, and in its place stood a figure. I fell to my knees. I could not bear to look directly at him, and yet I could not look away. His garments shone like woven light, his presence overwhelming yet filled with peace. But it was his eyes. His eyes held all the love of the universe. And then he spoke. "Ezra, my son." His voice was unlike any I had ever heard. It was not a sound, it was a truth that resonated in the very core of my being. "You have sought me all your life. In scriptures, in debates, in the pursuit of wisdom. But you looked for me where I was not, and rejected me where I was." I trembled. But the word escaped my lips before I could even think to say it. "Are you?" "I am." And in those two words, I knew. The scriptures I had studied my entire life flashed before me, but now they burned with a meaning I had never allowed myself to see. Isaiah 53, the suffering servant. Zechariah 12 verse 10, "They shall look upon me whom they have pierced." Daniel 9, the timeline that pointed to the Messiah's arrival. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed for explanations, for justification, but in his presence, there was only truth. "You have been given this moment not just for yourself, but for those who still wait. They search the scriptures, but they do not see. You must tell them." A new weight settled over me, not one of despair, but of purpose. "But they will not listen," I whispered. "They will call me a liar, a traitor, a fool." His gaze never wavered. "They rejected me first. But some will hear Ezra. And for them, you must speak." The light grew, filling everything, until there was nothing but brilliance. And then, I was back, lying on my kitchen floor. My wife sobbing beside me. The paramedics shouting. I had been dead for 14 minutes and 16 seconds. But I had returned with a message. And now I must tell the world the truth. The truth I was never told. What awaits on the other side? The days following my return were not filled with celebration. There was no sense of triumph, no overwhelming relief. Instead, I woke up to a world that no longer made sense. The rabbi who had lived and breathed Jewish law, who had built his identity on a foundation of unwavering belief, was gone. In his place stood a man burdened with a truth so profound that it threatened to unravel everything I had ever known. I tried to tell myself that it was all a hallucination, a side effect of oxygen deprivation, but the words I had heard, the presence I had encountered, would not let me rest. Every passage of scripture I had ever studied now carried a meaning I had once ignored. Isaiah, Zechariah, Daniel, the Torah itself. All of it pointed to the truth I had fought against my entire life. And yet, I remained silent. I watched my wife, my children, my congregation, people who trusted me, people who believed in me. How could I stand before them and say, "Everything I have taught you, everything I have devoted my life to, it's incomplete"? I was wrong. But the silence was unbearable. I lasted 3 days before I finally told Rebecca. I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had died, and I told her everything. I spoke of the darkness, the faces of the scholars, the cries of regret. I told her of the light, the voice, the man whose eyes held eternity. I recounted every scripture that had burned in my mind, every prophecy that had come alive in that moment of clarity. She said nothing for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Ezra, are you saying that Jesus is the Messiah?" I hesitated. It was one thing to know the truth. It was another to speak it aloud. But I could not lie. Just a single word that shattered decades of certainty. She exhaled sharply, her eyes filling with something I could not decipher. Not anger. Not disbelief. Something deeper. "You realize what this means, don't you?" I nodded. It meant losing everything. My position as a rabbi. My congregation. The respect of my peers. The legacy my ancestors had built. The certainty that had carried me through my entire life. But I could not unsee what I had seen. That Friday, I stood before my congregation as I had done for years. I led the Shabbat service. I spoke the prayers, chanted the blessings, and then, as I stood behind the podium, I broke my silence. For many years, I have led you with confidence. I have taught you the words of the Torah, the wisdom of the Talmud, and the traditions passed down through generations. I have answered your questions, guided your doubts, and assured you of our shared truth. A hush fell over the room. They sensed it, the weight in my voice, the hesitation in my breath. But something has happened. Something that has changed everything. I told them my story. Not the softened version. Not the sanitized explanation. The truth. I spoke of the prophecies we had overlooked, the Messiah we had waited for, and the reality I had been confronted with. I told them about the faces in the walls, the cries of regret, the realization that we had been waiting for what had already come. And I told them about him. The moment his name left my lips, the room shifted. Some gasped. Some whispered. Others sat in stunned silence. And then, the shouting began. Blasphemy! Have you lost your mind? This is a betrayal. The voices rose, angry and disbelieving. Some stormed out. Others pleaded with me, begging me to take back my words. You're confused, Rabbi, one of my closest friends said. This was just a near-death hallucination. It wasn't real, another insisted. You're being deceived. But I knew the truth. And the truth does not change based on our willingness to accept it. By the following morning, my fate was sealed. A meeting was held. My name was removed from the congregation registry. My position as rabbi was revoked. My closest friends no longer spoke to me. I was an outcast. But nothing could prepare me for the moment I sat across from my eldest son, David, the one who had followed in my footsteps, the one who had idolized me as a scholar, the one who was training to be a rabbi himself. Father, he said, his voice shaking. Tell me this isn't true. I reached for his hand. He pulled away. You're throwing everything away. No, David. I swallowed hard. I have finally found what I was always searching for. His eyes burned with betrayal. You're dead to me. He walked out. And just like that, I lost my son. A new beginning. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I had spent my entire existence searching for truth, defending truth, preaching truth. But now that I had found it, I had lost everything else. But in the midst of the loss, something unexpected happened. Others began to reach out. Not publicly, not loudly, but in whispers. Rabbi, I read the passages you spoke of, and I can't unsee them. What if you're right? I've had the same questions, but I was afraid to ask. For every door that closed, another quietly opened. For every friend who abandoned me, another seeker emerged. And then, Rebecca. One evening, after weeks of silence, she sat beside me and placed her hand over mine. I've been reading. My breath caught in my throat. At first, I was terrified. But, Ezra, what if this is the truth? What if he really is the Messiah? Tears filled my eyes. Then everything changes. She nodded. Then let it change. The truth that remains. I do not share this story lightly. I know what it means. I know what it will cost. Some will reject it outright. Some will call me a liar. Others will insist that I have been deceived. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And more than anything, I know him. The Messiah my people have waited for has already come. And he is coming again. This is my testimony. What you do with it is up to you. The cost of truth. What happened after I spoke out? In the days that followed my public confession, the walls of my old life crumbled faster than I had imagined. The congregation I had faithfully led for over 2 decades turned their backs on me overnight. Friends I had studied with, debated with, broken bread with, they no longer acknowledged my existence. My name was erased from synagogue records. My books and articles, once respected, were suddenly discredited. It was as if I had never been a part of their world. But the worst pain came not from strangers, nor even from my community. It came from my own family. My eldest son, David, the one who had once called me his greatest teacher, refused to speak to me. My daughter, Sarah, was confused, torn between her love for her father and the weight of our traditions. Even my youngest, Benjamin, who had always clung to me as a child, looked at me now with hesitation, as if I had become a stranger in my own home. Rebecca, my wife, though shaken, remained by my side. But I could see the turmoil in her eyes. What happens now? She asked one night as we lay in bed, 2 souls adrift in uncharted waters. I didn't have an answer. For the first time in my life, I had no roadmap. No ancient text to guide me through the reality of what I had seen. No tradition to lean on. But there was one thing I knew. I had seen the truth, and I could not turn away. Exile and revelation. Without a synagogue, without a position, I had no means to support my family. We had to leave Brooklyn. We packed up our belongings, the life we had built, and moved into a small apartment outside the city. The silence was deafening. Gone were the bustling Shabbat dinners filled with guests, the endless stream of visitors seeking wisdom and counsel. And yet, in that silence, something new began. For the first time in my life, I was learning rather than teaching, listening rather than speaking. I dove into the scriptures with new eyes. Everything I had spent decades studying looked different now. The sacrifices, the festivals, the priesthood, the very structure of Jewish worship, all of it pointed to him. Jesus. Yeshua. The Messiah. How had I not seen it before? Because I had never truly looked. For years, I had debated the meaning of Isaiah 53, dismissing the clear depiction of a suffering Messiah. I had argued that Psalm 22 was merely poetic. I had reinterpreted Daniel 9 to avoid the conclusion it so obviously presented. But now, I could no longer ignore what was in front of me. The Messiah had already come, and I had spent my life fighting against him. A message that cannot be silenced. I did not seek out others, but somehow, they began to find me. It started with whispers, emails, anonymous phone calls. Rabbi, I've been searching too. I've seen the same things in scripture, but I'm afraid. What do I do now? There were others like me. Scholars, leaders, Orthodox Jews who had seen what I had seen but were too afraid to speak. One by one they came. Some in secret, others openly. Each of them carried the same burden. A truth they could no longer deny, but a world that refused to hear it. And so, a new congregation was born. Not of tradition, not of law, but of revelation. We met in homes, in small gatherings. We studied. We prayed. And as word spread, the resistance grew stronger. I received threats. Hate mail. Warnings to stop speaking, to keep my revelations to myself. You are leading our people astray. You are a traitor. You are a fool. But how could I be silent? How could I return to the life I once knew, knowing what I now knew? The final revelation. One night as I sat alone in prayer, I heard the voice again. Not an audible sound. Not a vision. But a presence so real that it filled the room. Do you now understand? Tears streamed down my face. Yes, Lord. Then go. Tell them. The weight of those words settled deep in my soul. This was no longer about me. No longer about my suffering, my loss, my exile. This was about my people. A people still waiting. Still searching. Still looking for the Messiah who had already come. And so, I write these words. Not for acceptance. Not for approval. But for truth. The truth I spent my entire life missing. The truth that shattered my world, yet set me free. The truth that cost me everything, but gave me more than I ever had before. The choice before you. If you are reading this, it is not by accident. I know the fear, the doubts, the resistance. I lived it, but I urged the, not through the lens of tradition, not through the filters of centuries of interpretation. Look at the scriptures. Read Isaiah 53. Read Daniel 9. Read Zechariah 12. And then ask yourself, what if we were wrong? What if the Messiah has already come? And more importantly, what if he is coming again? The return and the mission, what comes next? I once believed that truth alone was enough, that if I simply presented the scriptures, the prophecies, and my experience, my people would see what I had seen. I was wrong. The human heart is not persuaded by logic alone. It is shaped by centuries of tradition, by the fear of rejection, by the weight of identity. To question is to risk everything. And yet, that is exactly what I must ask you to do. The rejection that followed. I did not expect my former congregation to welcome me back. But I also did not expect the violence of their response. When I attempted to return, to speak, to reason, I was met with outrage. I was shouted down, called an apostate, a traitor to my people. You have lost your mind. You are no longer one of us. You are dead to us. The weight of those words was heavier than I imagined. But what hurt more than their rejection was their refusal to even look. To consider. To ask the questions I had asked. Not one of them opened the scriptures with me. Not one of them debated the prophecies. They didn't need to. In their minds, I had already crossed a line that could never be undone. I left that day with a greater clarity than ever before. This would not be easy. The underground movement. What do you do when you can no longer speak openly? You whisper in the dark. At first, it was only a handful. Jews, some Orthodox, some secular, who had begun to question. They had seen inconsistencies in our teachings. They had felt the same unease I had felt for decades. And when they heard my story, something inside them stirred. If what you say is true, Rabbi, then why doesn't anyone else see it? Why do we ignore Isaiah 53? Why does Daniel's prophecy point to a Messiah who already came? They asked the same questions I had once buried. And so, we studied together. In secret. In homes. In hidden places. This was no ordinary Torah study. We did not debate the traditions of men. We searched for the truth of God. And one by one, their eyes began to open. Some wept. Some trembled. Some fought against it, even as the truth stared them in the face. If this is true, what does it mean for us? For our families? For our people? It meant everything had to change. The message that must be told. I do not expect the world to believe me. I do not expect you to believe me. But I ask you this. What if I am right? If Jesus is not the Messiah, then my suffering is meaningless. My rejection is in vain. But if he is, then everything changes. Then my people, the very ones who cast me out, are still waiting for someone who has already come. And worse, they are rejecting the one who can save them. A warning and a hope. I have seen the darkness. I have heard the voices of those who realized too late. I have witnessed the agony of truth recognized at the end of all things. And I would not wish that upon anyone. Not my worst enemy. Not the men who cursed me, spit on me, erased me from their lives. Not even the ones who sent death threats to my door. Because in that place, there is no undoing the past. But you still have a choice. I am not asking you to abandon your faith. I am asking you to fulfill it. To see what has been there all along. To recognize the Messiah we have longed for, the one who has already come and is coming again. Time is short. I do not know how much longer I will be able to speak freely. But as long as I have breath in my lungs, I will tell you this. He is real. He is alive. And he is waiting for you. The price of truth, what I lost and what I gained. When I first spoke out, I thought the hardest part would be the rejection of my congregation. I was wrong. The hardest part was losing my family. The betrayal that cut the deepest. My wife, Rebecca, had always been my strongest support. She was not just my partner in marriage, she was my partner in faith. For decades, we studied Torah together, debated Jewish law, raised our children to honor God. So when I told her what had happened to me, what I had seen, what I now knew to be true, I expected resistance. I did not expect the fear in her eyes. Ezra, do you know what you're saying? Do you understand what this will do to us? To our children? I tried to explain. I begged her to read the scriptures with me. To see what I had seen. She refused. This is not the man I married. Those words felt like a blade to my heart. And when she packed her bags, taking our youngest son with her, I realized something I had never considered before. For my wife, truth was not worth losing everything. Exile from my own blood. My older children refused to speak to me. David, my eldest, who had once dreamed of following in my footsteps as a rabbi, looked at me with disgust. You are dead to me, father. Sarah, my daughter, the light of my life, was quieter. But the pain in her face was worse than any words she could have said. They wanted nothing to do with me. Nothing. And in the weeks that followed, my name became a curse in my own community. I was no longer Rabbi Ezra Goldstein. I was Ezra the apostate. The cost of truth. I lost my home. I lost my position. I lost friends I had known since childhood. People I had guided, counseled, and comforted for years turned their backs on me overnight. The men who once called me brother, now called me heretic, and yet I could not deny what I had seen. I could not turn away from the truth, even if it cost me everything. The one who never left. On the night my wife walked out, I fell to my knees in despair. God, what have you done to me? Why would you show me this truth only to leave me abandoned? And then, in the silence, I heard the same voice that had spoken to me in the light. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I wept. Because in that moment, I understood something I had never understood before. I had spent my entire life studying God, but I had never truly known Him. Not until now. The unexpected grace. In the months that followed, I was forced to start over. No congregation. No family. No reputation. Just the truth. And then, something unexpected happened. Other Jews, men and women like me, who had begun to question, found me. They reached out in secret in whispers. Rabbi, I think I see it too. Rabbi, what do I do now? I was no longer a rabbi of a synagogue. I was now a rabbi of the rejected. Of the ones who dared to ask, to seek, to find. And in that, I found purpose again. To those who are afraid. I know what it feels like to doubt. To fear what the truth might cost you. To wonder if seeing clearly is worth losing everything. I cannot promise you that this path will be easy. I cannot promise you that you won't lose people you love. But I can promise you this. You will never be alone. He is real. He is alive. And no matter how many turn away from you, he never will. The final call, what will you do with the truth? If you've made it this far, there's a reason. What I have shared is not just my story. It is a warning. It is an invitation. And now, the choice is yours. The two paths before you. There are only two ways forward. You can walk away. Pretend this never happened. Convince yourself that my experience was just a dream, a hallucination, a fabrication. Or, you can search for yourself. Read the scriptures. Not through the lens of tradition, but with open eyes. Ask the questions that are burning inside you. Dare to challenge what you've been told. Because if what I have shared is true, then it changes everything. A truth that cannot be ignored. I did not ask for this revelation. I did not seek to destroy my life as I knew it. I only sought the truth. And the truth found me. Not in the way I expected. Not in the way I wanted. But in the way I needed. And now you are here. Hearing these words. Feeling that pull in your soul. That is not an accident. The weight of eternity. I stood before the undeniable reality of eternity. I saw what happens when we reject the truth. I heard the cries of those who ignored the warnings. And I saw the light. I met the one we have waited for. The one we were taught to deny. And yet he was waiting for me. Not with anger. Not with condemnation. But with love. You still have time. I was given a second chance. A chance to return. To warn. To tell you what I saw so that you don't have to find out the hard way. But that second chance will not last forever. Time is running out. Not just for you. For all of us. The final question. So now I ask you. Will you open your eyes while there is still time? Or will you wait until it is too late? I have done my part. I have told you what I saw. What happens next is up to you.